I just found it really funny that we're both doing this early on a Saturday morning because we're just about to be daddy daycare for the whole weekend. Like, we've both got this, our wives are going away, we've both got the kids for the weekend, so we're trying to sneak this in before everything starts. So, thank you very much for joining me here today, Mike. Would you like to just introduce yourself to our community? I'm sure some of them have seen you around, but who are you, Mike?
Sure. My name is Mike Popowich. I've been playing Flesh and Blood since about February of 2021, and I have become a little bit prominent on Twitter with my cocktails. And so I've been doing that for about over a year now.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to be here today and share my love of Flesh and Blood and cocktails.
Well, as I say, thank you very much for joining me. It's a ridiculous. Is it nearly 6 o'clock in the morning where you are? Just so
It
that
is.
you can do this before the kids get up and kick off. I've managed to subdue mine with a film. I think they're watching Harry Potter for the next hour or so. Um, so it gives us a little bit of time to just chat. Thank you very much for that introduction. Obviously, you're one of our Patreons, so again, thank you for being part of our community.
My
it's
pleasure.
it's always good to have you pipe up on the Discord with some of your comments and keeping us honest with what we do. My first memory of you is, well, of meeting you was at Pro Tour 1 in New Jersey, and I spotted this guy running up to me with a cooler of beers. Mike here brought me four beers, or us, four beers, which we then drank. Trip and I drank in a draft after the Pro Tour started. So you were fully on brief there, and just so kind, so generous to bring us beer in New Jersey. Like, what was that planned? Did you just think, oh well, they're going to be there, we'll bring some beer?
No, yeah, for sure. I was at a really cool brewery a couple weeks before I went to New Jersey, and obviously I knew you guys were coming, and the Push the Point team would be there. And so I was like, wow, I have these great sours. I think Simon and Trip might really
Yeah.
appreciate that. So I did make sure to pack those with me. I mean, in addition to the beers you guys got, I had an entire large red cooler full of beer and booze for like the roommates I was staying with and stuff. And so I don't pack lightly when I can drive, and so I try and make sure that everybody gets a little bit when I can. So,
Well, that was very
so I think
kind.
finally on the last day, I tracked you down and threw you a couple beers in the middle of rounds.
You did, and yeah, as I say, we enjoyed that. We had a box of Arcane Rising, and we drafted that in our hotel just before we all left the next day, and they went down very well. Thank you very much. And just,
Yes.
I know we spoke. It's probably a bit early to be drinking, but I did bring a stout just in case. I've got some BrewDog Cake Cartel, which is a hazelnut stout, and I know you had one planned, but 5:30 in the morning is probably a bit early.
Yes, I just discovered a new brewery about 15 minutes from my house called Fiden's. They don't distribute at restaurants or at stores or
Oh
anything. You
wow!
just have to go to this garage and pick up the beer, and it is ultra premium beer as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting for me. So I had picked out a coffee stout that's coming in at 9%, and
Oh, nice. And
we'll
so
see if I end up cracking that open or not.
do they have a tap room there, or is it just literally a
No,
warehouse?
so they did have a tap room before the pandemic, but then they expanded production during the pandemic, and so then they took lost that space. So right now it's just
Okay.
pretty much a garage you show up to. You can
Wow.
buy the beer and then enjoy it on your own time.
That reminds me of a when the pandemic started. I was living in Toronto, and there's a brewery in the GTO called the Great Lakes Brewery, and they would deliver these amazing beers. They would jump in their van and drive around and deliver. It's got quite big now. They do tons and tons of beers, but it was like a little mini lifeline, a little hope
Yeah.
of good beer when you couldn't really leave the house. So you started just during the pandemic. You started Flesh and Blood as New York was under lockdown.
Yeah, so I would say we were done with lockdowns at the
Okay.
time. It was just when we were coming out of lockdowns and my job was kind of stabilizing.
Mm,
And so then I feel like I was just looking for something new.
yeah.
And I had played Magic for, since the 90s, really on and off. And
Okay.
then starting in like 2014, I really, really discovered limited Magic. And I just, was drafting
Mm,
all the time online and went in person when I could. And I loved Magic Online. And I think, around like 2019, right before the pandemic, I started to get a little like tired with
Yeah.
Magic, and especially just from, I don't think it gets talked about much, but just even from the limited perspective, it's just kind of like, it was kind of like the same archetypes over and over again, where it was like, oh, it's blue red spells matter, and like green white counters or something. And so I think like subconsciously I was like ready for something different. And then obviously the pandemic happened, and
Yeah.
I lost a year of my life with what I do working in a virus lab. But coming out of it, I followed LSV on Twitter,
Okay.
and he was a big Magic personality.
Yeah.
And so then, he was hyping Flesh and Blood at that point because of his associations with Channel Fireball.
Yeah.
And then so there was a few months that was going by where like, once a week I would see something about Flesh and Blood. And I think just like something resonated with the name or something. I was never somebody who had any interest in playing another card
Yeah.
game. I was just kind of one of those, I play Magic. I'm not trying to play anything else.
Okay.
And then before I knew it, like I was buying boxes of Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising and trying to figure out how to play with my buddies in my basement. And the rest is history.
Yeah, you mentioned LSV there. I think I remember I'm not a Magic player. I didn't really have a history in card games before Flesh and Blood, but I remember seeing his first few articles of like how to play and how to like what you were going to find in boxes of Welcome to Wraith. And I remember it being a really big thing. Like the small Flesh and Blood community at the time was like, oh my goodness, someone from Magic is hyping the game. This is going to bring so many new people in. So you were one of those people. You saw his articles and you were like the conduit for your friends to go and learn to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then there was no scene locally for me for a long time. My first official event I went to was the Monarch pre-release.
Okay.
But that was about a 3-hour drive away from me that I went to. And then, really for a full year there, like there was no armories within an hour of me. I would drive to different states, like on Friday nights or on Tuesday nights to try and hit up an armory. So I'd be able to go like once a month. So it was like kind of in this weird spot with Flesh and Blood for almost a year where it's just like, I want to play more, but I can't.
Yeah.
My friends, I'm getting into it, like they enjoy it, but they're not like super into it like I was. So like it was tough. And then I think it was November of 2021. I saw a tweet from Brian Gottlieb kind of lamenting that there was no scene in upstate New York. And he kind of tagged a local game store near me. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like I followed Brian Gottlieb from Magic Games, from my Magic days. And I didn't realize he lived near me. I didn't realize he would ever go to like my game store. And I didn't know he played Flesh and Blood. But all of a sudden there was this major Magic personality kind of saying like, hey, I want to play Flesh and Blood in the area where I lived. And I was like, this is it. It's starting to happen now. And then, sure enough, a couple months later, he had organized a welcome event at Flipside Gaming, which is the game store I play at. And ever since, I think March of 2022, I've been trying to play there every week.
And is Brian a regular at your armories? Like, does he continue to play?
He does show up.
Yeah.
In the beginning, he was a regular. I would say nowadays he doesn't show up as often. He's
a game developer
a lot
now,
of the time now. Yeah. So he's the developer, and so it's always fun when he does show up because you get little bits of wisdom from him. But at the same time, he's a great person and super humble, and you wouldn't really ever know he was a game developer or someone of higher standing in the community when he's just there. He's just one of the guys playing games.
Nice. And so what was the game store, sorry, that you play at now?
Flipside Gaming.
Flipside Gaming. And they've continued to have a decent scene? Like you have a good turnout regularly?
Yeah, I mean, we fire events every week. We probably have 10 4 people who, and then, any given week, there'll be a couple people who don't show up. So we're normally like, 7, 8, 9 people every week. So
three regular rounds and maybe a bye every now and then.
Yeah, but, and so when we get the 4 rounds, when we get 9 people, that's always fun.
And just as a slight aside, how do you find new players take to the game where you are? Do you manage to get a couple of new people in every now and then? Or I know there's been social media chatter about prices and barriers to entry for people. Like, how do you find it locally to you?
Yeah, I feel like it is hard. Like most of our core group is the group of people that started right at the welcome event, and so we haven't picked up too many people since then. There are definitely a few folks who have started in the past 6 months, but for the most part, it is kind of like the original group, and then slowly over time, people might disappear. So you're like, ugh. So it is actually like a conversation we're having right now of like trying to get some new faces in, and so we run. I think part of our problem is that we'll do CC one week, draft the next week, blitz the next week. So it's like that's very not new player friendly if you're changing formats every week. But it's like what the core people want to do, but it's at the same time it's hard for other people to jump in. So that's a tough balancing act. But I think we've decided to try and do. I guess my understanding is that the new blitz decks you can do an official Armory format that's just playing with the blitz decks. And so we're planning for next month to try and do that event. So there's no minimal barrier entry in terms of the deck.
Yeah.
And so we'll try and get our game store to publicize that a little bit and see if we can get anybody new to show up and go from there.
I think similarly, a couple of my local game stores are doing the same thing. Like they include the price of the deck in the entry to the event, and then prizes on the floor and participation stuff. It's something that we've tried before, but now there seems to be official LSS support for it, and they've advertised it as a casual like Armory night. It seems to be maybe there's more of a recognition from LSS that we need to get those casual players involved and enjoying the game. It's not just about the hyper competitive stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it just makes it easier with like not having to worry about the deck, right? That's like I think the biggest thing where the deck's on the even level. Yeah. We have some people show up with just the blitz deck when everybody else has all their legendaries and majestics, and it's just like, I mean, we actually like no, don't use this deck, and like we try and give them a different deck, but then they feel bad because they literally just bought the blitz deck off the shelf, and we're like, no, don't use that.
Yeah. I mean, when you've bought it and put money into it, you want to use it as well. So I can understand that's tricky. So what do you generally play? Who's your go-to hero? I can see a picture of the Mangle art just behind you. It's half obscured on our screen, but is Bravo your go-to guy? Like, is that your?
I would say my primary person is Levia. I'm part of the League of Levia. So I think I'm just like a Timmy at heart where I like big attacks. So Brute and Guardian are really my two main classes, and then I kind of dabble in everything else. But I think I proudly say Levi is my main.
I mean, the League of Levi is a thing of its own now. I mean, Mansant's got that whole thing set up, and obviously over here in the UK we've got Az with the Cult of Azalea. It's nice to have such a fan base for. I don't want to say niche heroes, but maybe off meta heroes.
Yeah, so like I think almost something's wrong with me because I can't will myself to play like the on meta decks. Like I kind of like have to play the off meta decks. Like before Uprising, I had decided I liked the art for 5. There was that cool Uprising art with like the ninja flying through the air, and I was like, I never played ninja. This is gonna be great. So as soon as Uprising came out, I bought all the ninja stuff, ready to play 5, and then he became the best deck.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, I can't
do
play
that
this,
anymore.
and I never even built the deck. So there's just like, I at the very least I might not be good, but I do want to have somebody play it. Like if someone plays me, I want them to play a deck that they don't play all the time. So I think that's just part of how I like to play.
That's fair. And I've got friends just like you who refuse to play anything too good in a way. I think there's a risk when you play a good deck. There's a risk that if you lose with it, you start thinking, well, I'm just a terrible player, like everyone else can win with this deck, and that's not always the case, obviously, but it is nice to play those lesser known heroes. And I mean, I know I'm a Katsu player, he's not meta, but it's nice to catch people out sometimes and play a deck they're not used to playing against. They don't have a sideboard for, and you just think, well, I'm going to take this advantage and see if I can run with it, right?
Yeah, if you don't have reps against Katsu, you're in trouble generally because you're going to mess up. So.
I just saw one of the original Brute diehards in Kenderdine from Right Time Gaming. I saw this morning he'd been to an RTN and top 8'd with Levia, and there was a Rhinar there who top 8'd as well. So it is possible. People are out there
Yeah.
doing these, putting the reps in. So yeah, good on you. The
No,
League of
yeah, I
Leviathan.
100% agree that like if I had more reps and I was a better player, like they are. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can win with the decks. It's not like it's really a deck. It's just me that doesn't
Now
win.
you're just being modest. Um, so talking of, we've mentioned the Pro Tour, we've mentioned how you got into Flesh and Blood. What's been your absolute highlight so far in the game? Obviously, you've been in a couple of years now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the end, like this is the first time in my life I've been part of a TCG community.
Hmm.
Like with Magic, I just play online and it's whatever. And so for me, like going to the major events, going to Jersey, going to Baltimore, saying hi to lots of people, talking with
Yeah.
people from all over the world, has really been like a joy for me.
Yeah.
And it's been a night as like a fab dad, just having on Thursday nights having a place to go where you can just play some games and kind of unwind is it's just that's really the best part for me. So I don't have any wins to talk about or anything like that. So for me, it's just all the pleasure of
Hmm.
playing games and having fun with great people.
Now you mentioned something that's becoming a bit more common in the vocabulary now, being a fad dad. Um,
Yeah.
we mentioned at the beginning we're both dads. We both like the card game. Um, I saw recently there was a someone on Twitter looking to make a competitive team of just fab dads. I I think what you've mentioned is a really important thing. Being able to go to your local game store or have a group of people, a community where you can just relax and offload the stresses of the day or the week with your kids and family and just be separate, like recharge almost before you come back into the fold with your family. And James White talks about this third place where you can go away from work, away from home, and just recharge. Um, do you feel like that's quite a common thing in your community? Is it a lot of fat dads, or is it a bit of a mix?
I think I am the only fab dad. No, there's one other,
Okay.
Gabe. So there's a couple of
Mm,
us in my community. Most of the folks are kind of, guys in their later 20s, early
yeah.
30s, sort of that more typical demographic.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm eternally grateful for my wife Sarah, where she
Yeah.
always lets me go out on Thursday nights or travel to Baltimore for a weekend and stuff. And so I think all the Fab Dabs are very thankful for
Absolutely.
our counterparts that let us do what we do.
Yeah, it's amazing. I sometimes think how much support they give us in terms, especially from here in the UK, like being allowed to travel to San Jose for Worlds, for example, or New Jersey for Pro Tour One, and just realizing how lucky you are to have a family that's very supportive, and that goes both ways, obviously. Um, Now, the real meat of this, like the reason I really wanted to get you on, not that I'm dependent on alcohol at all, but you have a way of making up these cocktails around flesh and blood characters or cards, and like I want to know where that started. How did you bring those two things together?
So my entire adult life, I was really into cooking, right? And
Okay.
so before I was a father, like on Wednesday nights, I would cook for 3 hours and make
Wow.
extravagant fine dining meals for my wife and stuff. And then so, as time went on, like having the time to be able to do that on a weeknight,
Mm,
that kind of trails
definitely.
off. But I still kind of wanted an outlet to make
Yeah.
interesting and delicious things that I could share with people and stuff. And so maybe about like 7, 8 years ago, like I really picked up making cocktails seriously.
Yeah.
And so like there's like certain really influential books from me, Death and Company and Smuggler's Cove that really like teach you how to make cocktails
Okay.
properly and what ingredients to use. And so I've been doing that for quite a long time. And then in the Attack Action Podcast Discord, we would have Discord socials.
Okay.
And so one time I was like, hey, how about I make a cocktail and everybody also makes that cocktail? And so I wasn't doing it based off cards at that point. I
Yeah.
had just made up a cocktail called Old Hymns Milk. And so it was
there's,
a
there's a thought.
it, it was a flip. And so it had a whole egg in it and
Wow.
eggnog and brandy and some other syrups. And so for the Discord social, like a bunch of people made up this flip and And so then it's kind of, that was like the original
Mm.
point where it's like, okay, I can do Flesh and Blood cocktails. And then I think we did that one or two more times. And then when I went to Pro Tour Jersey, I I made a giant 2 liter bottle of what I call Doomsday Punch. And it
Nice.
was a big milk punch. And a milk punch is when you take a liquor, milk and citrus and put it all together,
Wow.
and it all curdles up in a really gross way. And you're like, what is
Yeah.
this? And then you strain that out in cheesecloth, and it ends up like the curdled milk ends up removing a lot of the
Yeah.
astringency from the liquor,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you get this nice, clear,
Really
full-bodied, delicious
clarified.
concoction.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was my Doomsday Punch.
Wow.
And then I had posted that up on Twitter, and I had some response to that. And then after New Jersey, that's when I started just like, a couple times a week, once a week, I'll try to
Yeah.
post up a cocktail kind of associated with a card. And then I always like it when people request that if I can make a cocktail with their favorite card or something like that. And so I do the best I can do with
You
inventing
did
new
a push the point
cocktails.
one, right? You did a
I did a push the point. Yes, that was one of my first ones.
yeah. So if you if you had to pick a favorite of your Flesh and Blood cocktails, do you have one in mind?
Yeah. So in terms of like things come out differently. There's the ones
Yeah.
that look the best for
Yes.
the
Okay.
photo, and then the ones that taste the best.
Okay. So give
And
me
so
one of each. Yeah.
in terms of how it looked, I was very proud of my Become the Arc Knight.
Yeah.
So the art for that has kind of
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
split photo where like the face is kind of split in half. And so I ended up buying some glassware that had a
Yeah.
vertical split in it, and I made one side purple and one side clear, and it kind of mimicked the art for that. So
Yeah. That was
I
really
was
cool
kind
to
of
see,
proud
actually.
with the way that one turned out, and that one got the James White like too. So I was like,
Yeah.
all right,
That's what you
this is
need.
great.
Yeah.
And in terms of my favorite cocktail in terms of taste is
Mm.
probably, I would say, a Blood Rush Bello,
Mm.
which is a margarita
Yeah.
made with half lime juice, half blood orange juice.
Nice.
And
Gives it that
so
color
that was
change.
that's just yeah, and it's just delicious. And so it has the right colors, it tastes good, and will make you bellow at the end of the evening.
So, I mean, I probably should have started with this question, but like, are the margaritas your sort of go-to cocktail normally? Do you have a specific alcohol that you prefer in a cocktail, or are you quite open?
I'm quite open, except for vodka. I generally avoid any vodka
Yeah,
cocktails, and that's just coming from the principles that like it doesn't bring any flavor to that cocktail, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
see that as a downside
yeah,
where then you'd really have to try and compensate for that.
yeah.
So you'll never see me make a vodka cocktail for the most part, but everything else I try and acquire, and I have a full bar otherwise.
I guess you've mentioned it being a downside that it doesn't bring flavor. I guess some people might see that as a positive, so you're not getting necessarily you can use it as a blank canvas for other ingredients, but then why using alcohol in the first place? I guess to
Yeah,
make it.
yeah. I mean, it's just yeah. For me, it's just like I want to make my cocktails as flavorful and interesting as possible, and it's just hard to do that with vodka. I mean, if I'm making a martini, it's a gin martini. It's
Yeah,
it's just there's
it's
no
it's
reason for
better.
me
I mean, I love
personally
gin.
to
It's
do
it's
that.
the botanicals, the flavors, the different kinds of mixtures you've got going on there. It's hard to beat a gin martini over a vodka martini. Um, I mean, I've been looking at your liquor cabinet behind you, trying to work out exactly what you've got. It's we went to a friend's cocktail night recently, and every person had to sort of come with a cocktail in mind to make and ingredients. So I think cocktails are one of those things when you first start out, you don't have any of the syrups, any of the bitters, any of the ingredients that you might need, and you probably only need a small amount of each one. So there's an initial outlay of buying bottles of these ingredients, but my go-to cocktail is a Mai Tai. I like a fruit rum cocktail, and it's quite a strong one, but I enjoy it. And so I went out and got the curacao and the different rums. The lime juice is fairly easy. Sugar syrup's fairly easy. And the other ingredient that I'd never heard of was orgeat or orgrit.
Yeah, I pronounce it orge, but yeah, I mean
Orgeat, yeah, mate. Okay,
it's a French word, so I mean,
French. It's an
Yeah,
almond
French.
syrup. It tastes delicious. It's like marzipan.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to have that in my liquor cabinet now, and be able to, yeah, as you say, it's a bit creative, a bit, um, as with cooking or even deck brewing in Flesh and Blood, right? It gives you those um, accomplishment feelings of winning just by making something, just by producing something and putting something together. I completely understand that. I love the fact that you're
Yeah.
doing it on a regular basis.
And I think there's an interesting comparison between Flesh and Blood and making cocktails where it's really not about the quality of the ingredients you're
Mm,
using. It's about the person making the cocktail. Like if you know the techniques and you know how to make a good
yeah,
cocktail, you can make a great cocktail. And whereas kind of like Flesh and Blood, where like a better pilot will beat somebody with a better
I
deck.
like that. Yeah, I
And
like that analogy.
so it's it's if you want to take the time to learn how to make cocktails, it's it really pays off. And but the one downside though is that you can no longer order cocktails at a restaurant or bar anymore for the
Oh,
most part because they all taste awful for the most part. Unless you go to a very like specific
very
cocktail
good
place that
place.
is doing it well. Like I just can't justify spending $13 on a crappy Manhattan anymore. So,
Yeah, you might
but
be
I just gotta
right.
stick to beer.
I mean, so obviously at Push the Point, we are big fans of beer. We all have our own uh, preferences, should we say? Trip and I tend to be on the fruity or darker end of the beers, and Hamish likes his light beers. I'm not sure whether I'm going to have to ask them on the next podcast where they stand on cocktails. I'm not sure. Hamish seems like a cocktail guy. The comfortizer is probably the peak of his cocktail making ability. For anyone that remembers that far back. Um, so just before we finish, obviously you've talked about some of the cocktails you've made, but is there a process you go through? Do you identify a card, or do you identify like a core ingredient that you want to work around first, or how does it work?
It kind of flows both ways. Sometimes I go off a card, and it might be something in the name
Yeah.
where that it makes it easier to design a cocktail around it. Like it's like, okay, red in the ledger. Oh, it's red.
It's
So
red.
we're gonna make a red cocktail,
Okay.
right? Or just something if it's like a big attack, like okay, you want it to be like a stiff, strong cocktail that's
Yeah.
trying to knock you on the ground, right? So there's something like that. And then other times I'm just making cocktails otherwise, and I'm like, okay, how can I work a card into this?
Yeah.
And so, I try and figure out, okay, well, there's actually like a snake on this bottle, so I'll do like the spring load card or something like that, right? So it goes both ways. I try to make everything original,
Yeah.
so I go off. Not everything has been over time, but for the most part, I try and do some things that are original. And so, generally, I'm taking like some kind of classic cocktail and either splitting out the base of it instead of it being a rum cocktail, I make it a rum and gin cocktail or something like that, or
Yeah.
swapping out an ingredient where it's instead of apricot, I'm putting in peach or something like that. And so, you just kind of do Mr. Potato Head with the ingredients and take one thing out, put one thing in, and you can come up with some interesting stuff.
I have a little guest in here now. I'm gonna try and remember the time.
Hello.
We made it nearly all the way through. I'm gonna get Hamish.
Yeah,
See if we can get that cut
I'm
out.
no stirring on my end yet, so
No,
that's
good.
good.
Well, I'm not gonna keep you too much longer. Um, okay, buddy. Just tell us, Mike, where can we find you? How can we send our cocktail requests to you, and follow up on see if they've been made or not?
Yeah, my DMs are open on Twitter. I am Papo Mike, IP5 Cocktails on Twitter,
Yeah,
and so that's the best place to find me. Send me a message or in private or in public, and I'll be happy to try and design a cocktail for you.
amazing. And is there anyone you want to give a shout out to? Anyone local? You've already mentioned family and your local game store. Like anyone else you want to
Yeah,
highlight in the community?
I'll shout out the Attack Action podcast. They've always been really great to me and are kind of the beginnings of my flesh and blood journey. I'll shout out Push the Point for all the great work that you guys do, and for all the great folks at Flipside Gaming. I love all you.
Well, again, Mike, thank you for being here at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Thank you for being one of our Patreons and being an amazing part of our community. And again, I just want to give a big shout out to the Flesh and Blood community on the whole. Such a positive place to be. There's so many different people, such a diverse community, and just generally so supportive. So thank you for being a part of that, and hopefully we'll get to catch up again soon.
Yeah, I hope I see you again sometime somewhere.
Cheers, buddy.
I'll make sure to bring something for you.
Ah, please do.